Hello, I'm Tamara Love. Welcome to Different Drummers. According to government estimates, there are over 200,000 sexually abused children in the United States, and almost 400,000 children suffer from physical abuse. One particularly horrific case recently made national headlines when fugitive Chester Chet Arthur Stiles was arrested and charged with raping a 3-year-old girl on videotape. So to learn more about child abuse and how both adults and youngsters can recognize and help prevent it, we will turn to Dr. Jung-Mi Ying, Director of Mental Health Services for the Chicago Children's Advocacy Center for Sexually Abused Children. We also welcome Gail Kryzak, a deacon at Fourth Presbyterian Church and a member of the Mayor's Office Committee on Domestic Violence. Gail helps coordinate Fourth Church's Blue Bow campaign to raise awareness about child abuse. And we also welcome jazz singer Gail Bissesi. Gail just released a new album called Child Eyes to promote her charity, Maggie's Voice, that is working to end child abuse through the arts. Thank you all for coming here and discussing this huge issue with our children. I would like to start with Dr. Yi. How do you define child abuse?
Well, there are lots of different types of child abuse. There are 4 main types of child abuse. The biggest is neglect, child neglect, and that is when a caregiver or somebody who's responsible for taking care of a child doesn't provide for the basic needs. They can be like medical, food, shelter, so on. So that's the biggest type of child abuse. Physical abuse is next, and that is when a caregiver, again, other people who are responsible for taking care of a child, doesn't or inflicts harm, physical harm on the child. That can range from bruising to death. And then next is sexual abuse, in which children are touched inappropriately or children are asked to touch other people inappropriately. That includes sexual activity. It also includes exploitation, which is like child pornography, and then also exposure to child pornography. And then there's emotional, psychological abuse, which is really hard to prove, essentially. And that is when a caregiver or somebody who is responsible for that child really kind of impedes on the development of that child, emotional development, psychological development. That's when a parent or someone close to the child who supposedly is taking care of this child criticizes the child, tells him that he's a bad person, doesn't love the child, I wish I didn't have you as a child, and so on. Just negative comments that one might make to a child that really affects their child development and child self-esteem.
What does the Chicago Children's Advocacy Center do?
The Chicago Children's Advocacy Center was formed about 6 years ago, and that is a center. It's really more forensically oriented. We have 4 partnerships located within the center. They include pediatricians from Cook County Hospital, assistant state's attorneys, Chicago police detectives who are assigned specifically to investigate child sex abuse claims, as well as Department of Children and Family Services. And then we have the CCAC, or Chicago Children's Advocacy Center staff, who are there to advocate for children, like our advocates. I'm the Director of Mental Health Services, and we also do treatment for children who've come through our center and who've disclosed sexual abuse. We see approximately 2,500 to 3,000 kids a year who make disclosure of sexual abuse in the city of Chicago.
Okay, and let's move. Gail, let me ask you a question. Tell us about the Blue Bow campaign and how this got started. Thank you, Dr. Yi.
Well, the Blue Bow campaign actually got started initially from some lady that lived in Norfolk, Virginia. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, her grandchild was killed through child abuse. And it's a very sad story because he was beaten for not eating his Thanksgiving dinner. And so that's really how the campaign got started. The grandmother put a blue bow on the aerial of her van, her car, And it just kind of spread, and Fourth Presbyterian Church has connected and partnered with Parents Care and Share and Children's Home and Aid. And I believe it was one of the ministers at our church, who's no longer there, who had the original idea of putting the blue bows on the trees and observing, which is now National Child Abuse Prevention Month.
Why is Fourth Presbyterian involved so much?
Why is it involved so much? Well, I think we have we're blessed with wonderful ministers and people who want to integrate their faith out into the world. And certainly children, I think, are our most precious resource. And how we treat them has consequences not only for their lifetime, but for our society. So it's a spiritual problem, and I think it's a civic problem.
And you also started a charity, Maggie's Voice. Could you tell us a little bit about that, Gail?
Sure. Maggie's Voice is a charity that I just founded as of January this year, and it's dedicated to helping in child abuse through the arts. So our primary focus right now is putting together public outreach concerts where we will first and foremost raise money for child abuse prevention centers around the United States, as well as bring in local talented youth to showcase them and lift them up and give them a voice in the eye of the community through the arts.
Mm-hmm. Who's Maggie?
Maggie was my friend who took her life at 17 due to suffering as a child abuse victim.
Wow.
So my charity is in dedication to her and a tribute to her life.
And you really believe the arts can make a difference, giving these children an outlet and expression?
I certainly do. They provide healing, they provide growth and confidence and a way to express yourself that other means we have don't do. So I 100% yes, believe that. The arts can make a difference.
I think so too. Dr. Yee, what are some of the signs of child abuse?
Well, I think the biggest thing that a parent should look for or a caregiver should look for is drastic changes in the child's behavior. Whenever something is happening within the child's life, you know, some children are just not very vocal or verbal, especially very young children, so you just have to watch for changes in behavior. For physically abused kids, they tend to be a lot more kind of behaviorally acting out. For kids who are neglected, sexually abused, they tend to be more withdrawn. Things like changes in appetite, changes in sleep, changes in friendships, changes in how they react or interact with one another. If your children are quiet or if they're acting out too much, and you know that's a different type of behavior that you've observed in your child, then you should start asking questions.
Great. What does a child abuser look like?
You know, there is no way that you can look at somebody and determine whether or not that person is an offender. There is no way. I think that's a misconception. You know, child abuse takes place in any household. It does not discriminate with gender, with race, with socioeconomic status, age. There are children who are sexually offending on children these days as well, and that's a big problem that we're facing at the CAC and other CACs that I've talked with in the nation. And there are approximately over 400 children's advocacy centers around the country. So there really isn't one, you know, you can't just look at somebody and say, okay, this person is an offender. There really isn't. I think one thing I can say is specifically for sexual abuse, offenders are really good at kind of picking out children who are vulnerable, who look vulnerable, who are alone, who don't spend a lot of time with family members, who don't receive a lot of supervision, who are, you know, essentially alone, don't have any friends, and so on. And offenders are really good at looking for those kinds of kids, and then they start befriending them, and then are able to give them emotional connections, you know, other things that that child is not receiving from his or her